The coffee in my hand had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I hadn't moved. I was standing near the back of my mother's living room in Oakville, watching 60 people raise their glasses to my brother's announcement, and all I could think about was the number on the document he'd just slid across the dining table like it was a dinner menu. $42,000. That was what my brother, Daniel, had just declared he was selling my condo for. A 2-bedroom unit in a mid-rise on Dundas West in Toronto that I had saved for over 6 years, scraped together a down payment on while working double shifts, and registered under a holding company I had set up with my corporate lawyer 2 years ago. My condo. And he had just announced in front of my mother, my aunt, 3 cousins, his girlfriend, and a room full of people who thought champagne solved problems, that he was transferring it to his business partner, a man named Craig, as partial settlement for a failed joint venture. He didn't look at me when he said it. Neither did my mother. Before I tell you how I watched that room go completely silent without raising my voice once, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't throw the cold coffee. I didn't walk over and pull the document off the table. People who react immediately are people who haven't prepared. And I had been preparing for this specific moment for 4 months. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. To my family, I'm the quiet one, the one who moved to Toronto for work and never came back for holidays unless guilted into it, the one who doesn't understand how family is supposed to function. To my clients, I'm a contracts and intellectual property attorney at a mid-sized firm on Bay Street. I read agreements the way other people read text messages, fast, automatic, and I catch everything. I had suspected something was wrong in November when my mother asked me, very casually over the phone, whether I had updated the contact information on my property files. She said the condo board had apparently been sending notices to an old address. She asked if she could update it on my behalf, since she had a contact there. I told her I would handle it myself. She said, of course, and changed the subject to Daniel's new business. I didn't think much of it that night. But I am a lawyer. Lawyers don't dismiss anomalies, we document them. I pulled up the property records the following morning, and confirmed my ownership through the holding company was intact. But something else caught my attention. There was an amendment request, sitting and processing a change to the registered mailing address, submitted by someone with power of attorney documentation attached. The POA was signed in my mother's handwriting. My name was typed below it. I hadn't signed anything. I called the property office and had the amendment flagged and frozen within the hour. Then I called a colleague who specialized in title fraud and asked her, very hypothetically, what someone would need to do to transfer a property without the actual owner knowing, until it was too late. She walked me through the playbook in 11 minutes. It was not complicated. It was disturbingly common. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't call Daniel. I went back to my desk, opened a new file folder on my desktop, and started building a case. Here is what I found over the next 6 weeks. Daniel and Craig had been partners in a home renovation business that had dissolved badly. Daniel owed Craig somewhere around $80,000 in unpaid contractor fees and a disputed equipment loan. Craig had threatened to take him to small claims and then to the Ontario Superior Court if Daniel didn't settle. Daniel, who had no liquid assets, no property in his own name, and a history of borrowing money from our mother and never fully repaying it, had apparently offered my unit as collateral. Craig had agreed to accept it as partial settlement if the transfer could be completed before March. My mother had known. She had agreed to help. In her mind, she was saving her son from financial ruin. In her mind, she was simply redistributing a resource that her responsible daughter clearly didn't urgently need, to protect her struggling son from a consequence that would embarrass the family. I had heard that logic before. I'd heard it at 17 when she emptied the RESP she had set up for my education, the registered education savings plan that had my name on it to cover the down payment on a car Daniel wanted for his first job. She told me I was clever enough for student loans. She told me Daniel needed a boost. I worked through university on bursaries, a part-time job at a law firm's reception desk, and a second job waitressing on weekends. I graduated with a debt load that took me 5 years to clear. Daniel drove that car for 8 months before writing it off on the 401. I didn't collapse then. I built. I studied harder, networked more deliberately, and chose a specialty that put me in rooms where I understood exactly what was happening and most other people did not. I bought my condo with money I had earned, and invested carefully. I registered it under a holding company on the advice of a senior partner at my firm, partially for tax efficiency, partially because I had long suspected that anything in my direct name was something my family considered available for borrowing. That instinct had just proven itself correct. The March announcement at my mother's house in Oakville was not a surprise to me. I had known it was coming since January. What my brother and my mother did not know was what I had done in the 4 months between discovering the POA forgery and standing in that living room with cold coffee. I had retained a title fraud specialist and a litigation colleague. I had filed a declaration of interest with the land registry office, that attached a legal flag to any attempted transfer of the property. I had notified my bank, which held the mortgage, of a potential fraudulent transfer attempt. I had documented the forged POA and reported it to the Law Society, which opened a file. And in the week before that Sunday gathering, I had consulted with a detective constable at the Halton Regional Police Financial Crimes Unit, who confirmed that what had been attempted constituted fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. I had also, on the advice of my litigation colleague, done one more thing. I had executed a new, entirely legitimate transfer of the property not to a person, but into a numbered corporation that I controlled jointly with my firm as registered agent. The transfer was filed, stamped, and registered on the Friday before that Sunday. So when Daniel slid that document across my mother's dining table and announced to 60 people that he was settling his debt with Craig by signing over my condo, he was attempting to transfer a property that had already been transferred. The deed he was holding was 2 days out of date. He didn't know it yet. Craig was standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, looking satisfied the way men look satisfied when they believe they have already won. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a fleece vest over a collared shirt. He looked like someone who had never lost an argument in a room he'd already decided he controlled. My mother was at the head of the table, her hands folded, her expression carrying the particular mix of relief and righteousness that I had come to recognize as her tell. She wasn't ashamed. She genuinely believed this was the right thing to do. She believed that because Daniel was struggling and I was stable, the logical and loving thing was to move resources from one to the other. She believed my stability was a family asset. She believed my silence was consent. I set my coffee cup down on the side table. I walked toward the dining room. I did not move quickly. I have learned that the pace at which you move when you have already won tells the room everything before you speak. Daniel saw me coming. He straightened slightly. He knew I was not going to hug him. "Rachel," he started, his voice carrying the particular defensive, preemptive tone of someone who has rehearsed this conversation and is already losing it. "I just need you to understand the position I'm in." "I understand your position perfectly," I said. "I do contracts for a living." Craig pushed off the fireplace and walked into the dining room. He extended a hand. He said his name as if I didn't know it, as if we hadn't been briefly introduced at a family barbecue 3 summers ago, where he had spent 20 minutes talking about his investment portfolio and not asking anyone else a single question. I didn't take his hand. My mother stood up. "Rachel," she said, her voice dropping to that particular register she used when she wanted to signal that a scene was about to be embarrassing and it would be my fault. "Daniel has been going through an extremely difficult time. This is a practical solution. You are not living in that unit. You are renting it out. You told me yourself that it was income generating. You don't need it the way Daniel needs this right now." I looked at her. I felt something move through me. Not anger exactly, I had processed the anger months ago at my desk at midnight, but something quieter and more specific. It was the feeling of watching someone confirm, one final time, exactly who they are. "Mom," I said, "I appreciate you making this so clear." Craig had picked up the document Daniel had placed on the table. He was scanning it. He was already calculating. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, not dramatically. Just the way you retrieve a document when you need to reference something. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, "I want to make sure everyone here has accurate information." I set 2 pages on the table. "That unit," I said, "was transferred into a numbered corporation on Friday at 4:47 inches the afternoon. The transfer is registered with the Ontario Land Registry. The deed Daniel has is for a property I no longer hold in the capacity listed on that document. Signing it would be signing a transfer of something the transferor does not own, which under Section 380 of the Criminal Code is fraud." The room had gone quiet. Not the noisy quiet of a paused argument, the specific quiet of a space where everyone suddenly understands that something serious is happening. Craig set the document down. His expression had changed. The satisfaction was gone. In its place was a recalibration, the look of someone who has just realized the deal was different than described. "Daniel," he said. His voice was flat. Daniel was looking at the pages I had set on the table. I watched him read the registration date. I watched the date land. "Rachel," my mother said, and her voice had changed too. "The authority was gone. What's left when authority leaves a person is either honesty or panic. With my mother, it was panic first. You can reverse this. You can transfer it back. This is fixable. Daniel needs. I also want you to know," I said, still calmly, "that the power of attorney document submitted to the property office in November, the one bearing my name, has been reported to the Halton Police Financial Crimes Unit and to the Law Society of Ontario. A detective constable has reviewed it. The file is open." My mother sat down. Craig picked up his jacket from the back of the chair where he'd hung it when he arrived. He looked at Daniel with an expression that had no warmth in it whatsoever. "You told me this was clean," he said. Daniel didn't answer. "I have documentation of the original debt agreement between you and Daniel," I said to Craig. "I also have a colleague who specializes in civil recovery. If you want to pursue what Daniel actually owes you through the appropriate channels, That is a legitimate path. But this transfer is not happening. This property is not available. And anyone who attempts to proceed with this specific transaction will be proceeding into a fraud investigation that is already open. Craig left 12 minutes later. He did not say goodbye to anyone. My mother tried 3 times to redirect the conversation. She said I was being vindictive. She said I didn't understand what family meant. She said that a person with what I had should be willing to help a person with what Daniel had, and that my refusal to see it that way was a moral failure. I have spent a long time inside that particular argument. I have turned it over from every angle, the way you turn over a contract looking for the clause that changes everything. And here is what I have concluded. A person who believes your resources belong to them will always describe your boundaries as selfishness. They will always frame their taking as your withholding. There is no version of that conversation where you win, because the premise of the conversation is that you are already wrong. So I stopped trying to win it. I picked up my folder. I picked up my bag. I said, clearly and without any particular emotion, that I had reported what needed to be reported, that the property was protected, and that I was leaving. My mother followed me to the door. She was not begging, she was too proud for that, but she was close to it. She said she had always done her best. She said she loved both of us equally. She said I had always been the strong one, and she had always known I would be fine, that it wasn't fair, but it was the truth, and wasn't it better that the family stayed intact? I stopped at the door. I turned around. Mom, I said. I have been fine. But not because you protected me. Because I protected myself. From everything. Including this. I opened the door. Outside, the March air in Oakville was cold and clear, the kind of cold that doesn't apologize for itself. That is simply what it is. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. I want to be honest here, because I think honesty is the part of these stories that usually gets left out. I wasn't elated. I didn't feel triumphant the way you feel triumphant in movies, with a swell of music and a satisfied smile. I felt something quieter than that. Something that felt less like winning and more like finishing. I had spent 6 years building something. I had spent 4 months protecting it. I had done both of those things alone. Without help. Without anyone in my family understanding what it cost or caring enough to ask. And now the thing I had built was still mine. That was the whole of it. It was mine, and it was going to stay mine. I drove back to Toronto on the QEW, the lake gray and flat to my right, the city skyline appearing slowly through the haze ahead of me. I called my litigation colleague from the car, and left a voicemail confirming that everything had gone as anticipated, and that we could proceed with the formal documentation next week. I called my property manager and told her the unit was secure, and she could confirm the next tenant's lease as planned. Then I turned the music up, and I drove the rest of the way in something I had not felt in a long time. Quiet that belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, the fraud file moved forward without my having to do very much. The forged POA was sufficient basis for a formal investigation. My mother retained a lawyer not through me, obviously, and was ultimately not charged, but received a formal caution and a civil finding of fraudulent misrepresentation on the property record. Daniel settled his actual debt with Craig through a payment plan arranged by a licensed insolvency trustee. Craig got a judgment lien against Daniel's future income, which was the appropriate mechanism for recovering what he was actually owed. Nobody called to apologize. I didn't expect them to. What I want to say, to anyone watching this who has sat at a family table and felt the specific loneliness of being the person who is expected to give without being asked, who is used because your reliability has been mistaken for availability, what I want to say is this: building something is not selfish. Protecting what you built is not cold. Refusing to fund someone else's consequences with your own work is not a failure of love. The people who told you it was, they were wrong. You don't owe anyone your foundation. And the day you stop waiting for permission to protect yourself is the day you stop being manageable. I learned that later than I should have. But I learned it.